Hey everybody, I'm with Lina Zdruli. She is an amazing lady and I'm super excited to talk to her today. I've been telling you guys about how I've been working on a 3D printed prosthetic project for children in Gaza. Well, Lina here is the head of that project, so she's going to tell you guys all about it and a little bit of background on herself and the project. Super excited to talk to you today, Lina. I'm just going to quickly introduce her. She has a pretty impressive background. Lina Zdruli is a social entrepreneur and activist with 15 years of experience. She holds a master from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and has worked in the United Nations, World Banks, and World Bank and nonprofit throughout her international development career. So that's really impressive. She's gained experience in the private sector at institutions such as Italian Chamber of Commerce and Morgan Stanley. She's also lived in Ramallah and Rawabi to help develop entrepreneurship ecosystems for Palestine, supporting local employment and innovation. She's now on the steering committee for the Freedom Flotilla Coalition and is developing a program to bring low cost, high functionality, 3D printed prosthetics to amputees in Gaza, which is what we're talking about today. Lina, so excited to have you on today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Wally, for sharing. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, so aside from everything, aside from the intro I just kind of shared, I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit more about background about yourself, especially when it comes to your work related to Palestine and how you kind of floated into what you're doing today.
Yes, so the trajectory of my career has always been using business and technology for social good. I'm really passionate about capturing the ways that we can make either international development or grassroots projects as efficient as possible, but also supporting their sustainability by taking it from an employment and long-term perspective rather than just dropping aid or dropping a skills program then leaving. I'm very passionate about capacity building from a local perspective. And that's this whole trajectory has brought to the prosthetics project that we're working on right now, actually, because we're taking technology, we're taking open source formatting, like the different baseline models of 3D printed prosthetics that communities such as Enable have provided. And we're taking a very specific war zone of Gaza and adapting this technology impact to a resource constrained environment. And so it's taking into account many different skills, social, technical, as well as the emotion and human toll. And I think that's where these types of projects in many cases fail because they either fail to take account the technical aspects or they fail into taking into account the human aspect. And that's what we're trying to basically fill in that gap and make this project work.
I love it. You mentioned how it's important to focus on helping environments become self sufficient and not just giving aid. I completely agree with that. I feel like not enough people really understand that when you're just giving out aid and food and money to countries, you're not actually helping build their economy and you're not helping them be self sufficient. How did you start to recognize that the importance of that, and then relate it to what you're doing today? Because I think that's such an important point to highlight.
I would say it really relies on the my master's degree. A lot of the courses after graduation on large scale refugee projects, many times actually humanitarian interventions have destroyed the local market and destroyed smaller businesses because they come in with free aid and suddenly people are no longer purchasing produce, fruits, veggies, meat from their local suppliers, but they're receiving it for free from a humanitarian organization. Big mistakes of the 80s and 90s international aid was that they cut into local markets and suddenly destroyed what was there. Um, Later, there were different programs, cash transfer programs. So instead of giving people external food or, let's say, corn from the United States and milk from Canada, they would cash transfer a certain amount of money so that people can purchase locally and continue to sustain that local market until they were able to build up their jobs and build up their employment.
That's actually really interesting. So, do you think it's better in some cases? It depends, but did you learn from your experience that sometimes giving actual monetary aid would be better than just giving the product directly?
It's a very specific case by case basis. It's a really when you zoom out, it's a very specific international development model. Whether you're doing capacity building, so helping local markets build up, supporting, let's say, farmers or industry and others to provide those services locally. Sometimes when there is an immediate environmental disaster, for example, all of those services have been wiped out and there's just nothing there. So in that case, you do need to fill in with external aid because the local market is just not there. It really depends on a case by case basis if it's a sudden issue or not. But I think for the most part, we have learned from those mistakes from the 80s and 90s, and rather than going in with very large scale programs and thinking we know best and bypassing the local organization, I think now more and more we're taking into account those beneficiaries that we serve. What are their needs? What are their what's the cultural environment that they work in? When I lived in the West Bank in the summer of 2016. It was the summer between my 2 years of my master's program, and that's when I was helping entrepreneurs and building up the entrepreneurship ecosystem. I went into Jalazon refugee camp, right outside Ramallah, and I was interviewing smaller business owners. A seamstress, she was over 70 years old, a small shop owner, as well as the community leaders. And they, for example, were talking about how this is 2016, so I believe it was 10, 15 years prior. An external organization, I won't mention the name, uh, had come in and said, "Oh, we have this great project. We're going to help you make jam. We're going to help you make fruit jam." So it was a project targeted specifically at women and building farmers. So we're going to help you cultivate these fruits and make fruit jam and sell fruit jam, and that is how we are going to empower the women in Jalazon refugee camp, and you can sell this jam and it'll be fantastic. So they came into the project and they gave tons and tons of fruits, taught the women how to make the jam, and tried to sell it. The problem is in Jalazon, there's no agricultural land. It is the refugee camp is so dense, it's hard to find even two blades of grass. And so when that initial fruit that they had brought in ran out, when they saw that the market wasn't absorbing that many fruit jam jars and it was just not something that people really wanted or used, that project completely failed because that was not sustainable. They hadn't thought through
Mm.
that there's no place to truly grow this type of fruit, and the market didn't want the product that. So I think that's what's super important in all projects moving forward, to do first a needs assessment and a cultural assessment, and also understanding what is locally available, what's locally sold, and seeing if you can build that capacity. I think it's very paternalistic to come into any community anywhere in the world and say we have this solution and this is fantastic for you. Always needs to be homegrown. And that was why I had been sitting on this 3D printed prosthetics project for months. I'd thought about it since May, when I first started to get involved with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which I'll explain a bit later what that is. um, but I sat on this idea for several months because I thought, okay, I know that this solution has been replicated in Argentina, Ethiopia, Guatemala, several other countries, but I don't know if this is something that people in Gaza want, need, if it's the type of prosthetic that they will accept, etc. So I was leaning into my own resistance and my own experience in bringing in an external solution. And only after talking to several people on the ground, talking to doctors that had come back from Gaza, physiotherapists, I realized that the gap in the medical space and in the medical support space in Gaza is quite large for these interim high functionality but low cost solutions. Organizations have been using traditional prosthetics, fantastic quality, custom made to the person, but many times even prior to the past 15 months of what's been happening in Gaza, the waiting list was very long because these type of traditional prosthetics are very expensive. They're always imported externally, either from Germany, India, Russia, depending on which supplier is used. And so a person can spend minimum 6 months to an average of 18 months waiting for a prosthetic. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I actually have one of the prosthetics, one of the sample designs for the prosthetic with me today, and I've showed it to my followers and subscribers before, and I think it's absolutely incredible. Here, I'll zoom in. This was actually designed by a prosthetist. So this is just one of my designs. Lina sent it over. This is one of my prints, I mean. And it actually flexes with your hand. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about what you just said regarding the need for why we're even working on this 3D printed prosthetic project. It's because right now there is a huge demand for prosthetics because unfortunately so many children have lost their limbs in Gaza, and there's a shortage of them, and they're not able to come in, and they take a long time to come in. Can you explain a little bit more about that? And then also about the stats. It's so sad about hearing about the number of children in Gaza, the estimated number that are amputees. There's just, oh my gosh, it's so unfortunate. So if you could just share a little bit more about that, I think it would be great.
yes, even statistics in Gaza, it's a science and art on its own because there we haven't been able to receive from organizations on the ground the full scope of the damage. A registered number is 4,500 amputees. A conservative, and that's from several months ago that had been published. A conservative estimate is 15,000. And unfortunately, now MIT researchers on the ground that are building up the inventory of data and interviewing people and see many people are double or triple amputees, missing both arms or both legs or more than 2-3 limbs. And so that number of 15,000 might mean that there's a need of twice as many prosthetics, both upper and lower limb. And
And that 15,000 is for that 15,000 is just the current estimated total, and a large percentage of that is children.
exactly. We don't know exactly a written published statistic. Medical journals have not yet done that, but a conservative estimate is 15,000. On average, in Gaza, 60% of the population, if not more, is under 30 years old. Um, and on average, 55% are children. So we can say that even if you use a conservative number, at least 40% of amputees will be children, if not realistically more, because they are more delicate. Their bodies and their bones are still forming. And one medical article that came out was that an estimation, a guess from doctors, is that children have so many wounds and need for amputation, especially smaller children, because parents are picking them up. And so in trying to hold them, shield them, or run with them, unfortunately, they're in the front and they get caught in that blunt trauma. And so, but there are, again, the research is still being published, so it's difficult to be able to quote exact reputable numbers. But the need is tragically large.
Definitely. And with 3D printed prosthetics, I did prior to this, I think a lot of people didn't even know you could 3D print prosthetics. So, what kind of prosthetics can you 3D print? And if you could explain a little bit more about how we go about it, does it have to be specific kind of material? Can it be legs, arms, or what kind of prosthetics, and just all the details of that? I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, so the field of 3D printed prosthetics is possibly 10 or 15 years old in terms of coming about and discovering that you can actually create medical equipment thanks to this cool new technology that is 3D printing. And I think a lot of this innovation has come from people outside the medical field thinking creatively out of the box, because many times those in the medical field, rightfully so, are very busy or just think, oh, we have a solution, why do we need to have this lightweight? So I think what's been very interesting about this field is how there's been cross-pollination amongst many different people from different fields, and engineers, artists, UX designers, paired together with medical professionals to come about to these low weights, low cost solutions. Because when you think about it, you can, at least in the United States, print a prosthetic for about 15-20 USD when you count for most of the materials and the electricity used. Now, unfortunately, in other areas, the cost is actually higher because of tariffs and a difficulty in reaching filament. But even if you double or triple it, it's exponentially lower than the average prosthetic cost of 1,400 to 10,000 USD. And
Yeah, that's incredible.
so
And the prosthetics we're printing are for the upper limbs, correct? Can you 3D print for lower limbs? And if not, why?
there are some incredible organizations out there that are printing lower limb prosthetics and have done some innovation on that. There's a lot of difficulty when it comes to lower limb prosthetics because they are supporting the person upright. Many times when there's a lower limb loss, there's major physiotherapy that needs to be done for the person to relearn how to walk, possibly reactivate the muscles of their other leg. And so it's unfortunately in general a heavy physiotherapy process, as well as there are many theories saying that, for example, you should only stick to ISO certified lower limb prosthetics, because if you don't have the guarantee that they will sustain the person and a piece breaks, then they can fall and break a hip and further injure themselves. So you want to always be sure that you're never ever injuring or causing more harm by giving an extra tool to someone.
Definitely. And why is it important for children in Gaza to have prosthetics? What are the benefits of the prosthetics?
There are many different benefits. I mean, on the one hand, the estimation is that most of the children that would be receiving the prosthetics that we're collaborating on this project with, they've had to have an amputation because of blunt force trauma rather than a congenital issue. And so this means that the child suddenly has a loss of an upper limb, a function that they were always used to having, as opposed to a child that was born with a congenital disease and possibly had several years to adapt to a different way of becoming self-sufficient and going about their day. And in the brain, as well as the muscles and the nerves and other parts of the arm that they were able to preserve, those impulses begin to quiet slash slower down. And so if we can, for example, give a child again a printed prosthetic and a hand prosthetic, well, then they can begin to hold a cup with that printed prosthetic. They can begin to write. They can basically conduct their everyday activities, um, and restart in their brain that part that actually controls their arm and their hand, and regain that activity. Now, our prosthetics are not connected to the brain. Ours are mechanical prosthetics and they're not bionic. But even the act and the visuals of seeing this extension, this prosthetic, is very helpful to maintain brain plasticity for them.
Initially, when we were talking, we were mentioning how it's really important that when you go to places and you're trying to support certain communities, you make them self sufficient. Now, in Gaza, there is immediate needs, obviously. There is an immediate need because so much of the infrastructure is just completely obliterated at this point. So, although we're also focusing on providing them with immediate needs, there is a long term plan as well that's super important to make things self sufficient. How does 3D printed prosthetics relate to making Gaza more self sufficient in the long term?
Well, our hope, our dream is that after providing these initial completed prosthetics, we can begin local capacity building. So there are incredible engineers, incredible innovators already in Gaza that know not only know how to use a 3D printer, but they're absolute whizzes at it. They've either lost their 3D printers or don't have, for example, the economic capacity to purchase one. And in any case, right now, to our knowledge, it's blocked from even bringing printers in. But in the long run, the dream of a project like this would be to provide 3D printers to these to several people within Gaza so that they can begin to 3D print internally. We hope to build out a program where, paired with psychosocial support, hiring local Palestinian occupational therapists, psychologists, childhood trauma experts, as well as physiotherapists, we can create a holistic approach, homegrown approach based off of their input and their desires and how to build a program like this so that they can continue to print locally, customize prosthetics, customize medical equipment, and being inspired by the several other incredible organizations that have been doing this either locally in Gaza or in other regions and in conflict-prone regions.
I love it. And right now, we're in the phase where we are optimizing designs, making custom designs, and also manufacturing them. You want to talk a little bit about that and who you're doing this with, how the designs are being optimized, just kind of a general overview because I think it's so cool learning about this.
Yes, so there are some incredible organizations out there like Enable the Future, which is an organization of passionate, I want to say again, tech whizzes, engineers, 3D printing experts that have very generously open sourced their models of prosthetics. We've been inspired by their designs to then assemble a group of volunteer engineers, primarily based in Vancouver, Canada, to adapt those open source models to the specific needs of Gaza, as well as making it as sturdy and resilient as possible for the needs of a child, because we know a child is not particularly careful with what you give them. You want to make it as sturdy, as unbreakable as possible. We're also simplifying the design so that in the long run, with our hope that they can be printed in Gaza, you can assemble it in the shortest time possible rather than having several pieces. And so yeah, we're trying our best to adapt to this resource constraint. You know, in the US, while you're able to go to a store or go on Amazon and pick up any tool you need, any type of string, any bolt, that's not the case in Gaza, at least not right now. And so we're thinking, how can we be as creative as possible to use the least amount of materials as possible while having this prosthetic extra sturdy and extra functional?
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. And what can people do to support our initiative now? How can people be how can people support us?
Well, we have a GoFundMe campaign open, which we're raising funds to help support and hire local psychosocial experts as well as physiotherapy support for those who will need physiotherapy. Um, for the materials of the prosthetics, it's also very expensive to ship and to bring anything into Gaza right now. So we need help covering those costs as well to bring in that immediate need, as well as we're open to have any collaboration with doctors, occupational therapists, trauma specialists to help adapt the programs that we've made, as well as make some custom specific prosthetics. For example, there's a cyclist that he's an athlete and he wasn't able to continue his passion and career of cycling because in addition to lower limb loss, had upper limb loss, and suddenly he's not able to hold on to the handle. In this case, this is a very specific prosthetic we would need to make, so we would love to collaborate with other engineers that can help us adapt to these specific cases so that then we can donate this type of specific prosthetic as well.
It's amazing. And I'm going to link the GoFundMe below as well, including with your social media so people can follow you and find you on social media. Lina, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close off?
I just want to say one thing, and it comes a lot from my conversations and people reaching out to me. It can be extremely deflating and depressing to read the news, watch the videos that we see, not just from Gaza, we see them from Sudan, we see them from Congo, we see them from so many other conflict areas, we see environmental disasters, and sometimes there's a feeling of paralysis that everything is going wrong, that there's so much going wrong out there, and it affects us emotionally, mentally, even in our capacity to do anything. But I just really want to hopefully inspire um, everyone, and anyone can help support an issue. I'm not a doctor. I'm also not Palestinian. And none of those two things mean that you can't help. And I think the anchor, what really helped me was, for example, being in touch with a very active organization. In my case, it was the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. But I got to participate in a community of people that have been very active for decades. One of our oldest members is over 85 years old, and she's been in activism her whole life. And I think it's extremely important to be in community, to, take like step away a little bit from that screen time and reconnect to people that have been working so hard on any issue that you're passionate with, because I think this system of just being bombarded with negative news makes us almost paralyzed. Whereas anyone, no matter your background, no matter where you live, no matter your resource constraints, can do something and can make a change. And I think it's important for us all collectively to remember that.
That's such an important message. Lina, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you, Ali.